event here at Groundswell. And as part of that, Groundswell offered us the opportunity to have a couple of focus sessions on topics around water and ecosystem services. So obviously as a water company, we are a potential buyer of ecosystem services. There's a lot of talk about natural capital ecosystem services, certainly in the government at the moment. But a really important part of that is actually how do we monitor those ecosystem services that potentially the government or water companies are going to be paying for. It's a really important aspect. And I came across Sophia through talking with John Cherry, because Sophia was working with John on his farm, installing a soil moisture monitoring device, and I was speaking to John about it, and I was really fascinated because Sophia and her colleague Mark at King's College I'll let Sophia go into more detail, but kind of investigating the role that conservation agriculture can play in natural flood risk management, for example, and that kind of got me thinking, well, that's actually really links nicely to our interest in terms of aquifer recharge. So anything that's going to slow the flow, hold the water in the land for longer, help it infiltrate into the aquifer, and sort of limit flood further downstream is going to have multiple benefits. And I just found the whole topic really fascinating, and also found out about the devices that Sophia and her colleague have kind of been making. And I just thought this would be a really good opportunity to give Sophia a platform to share with you some of the work they've been doing. And we've brought some of the devices on the front of the stage, so at the end of it, feel free to come up and have a look. Just to kind of tell you a bit more about Sophia. She has a PhD in hydrology, specialising in the impact of drought and climate change, and now works for Ambiotech, a non-for-profit organisation that develops software to monitor and manage water, including floods and droughts. So that's enough from me, and I'll pass over to you. So thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, today I'd like to talk about low-cost, open data and DIY approaches to assessing and eventually valuing the public goods provided by your land. So I'm not trying to sell you anything or everything. I'd like to show you some results of our research and actually tell you about what's out there for free that you might be able to find useful. So I'm doing this in collaboration with King's College London, in particular Mark Mulligan and Arnout van Heusbergen, who prepared this presentation with me. So first of all, I'd like to talk about why would you be interested in connected technology. I'm talking about the environmental sensors that are connected to the internet, a network of environmental sensors. Why would farmers be interested in this? And then I want to go on what's already in place, including some results from the farm, from experiments we have on the farm right here today, and other examples that might be useful to you if you're interested in using internet-connected environmental monitoring. So connected technology is transforming our understanding of soil, of water, climate, and the production of food. You can see out there in the field today, and production of public goods or ecosystem services. So, and if you look to the future, that landscapes will be highly monitored in real time by companies, by environmental authorities, for improved management. In a time of scarce resources and scarce money, there will be it's useful to have this kind of data for best management and also early warning for natural hazards to the benefit of all. It's very much about open source data, not just the landowners or the farmers, but also globally we're looking. So in some ways, we already are. You're probably all familiar with this Google map of traffic of red, green, and blue. And this map is generated just from the phones that you have in your pockets as you're driving along. Google takes this anonymous data and compiles where the traffic is bad. And I'm sure you all share the same sense of joy that sometimes when Google, perhaps not joy, that was a bit strong, Google makes you go off the road on a different route in order to avoid a traffic jam, and therefore you can save quite a lot of time if you're in a rush. So this information is free and it's out there, but also really useful, and sometimes you don't know how useful it is until you've got it in your hand, in your pocket. So this is environmental monitoring that can directly benefits us all. So farmers, vitally important. They're custodians of 72% of UK land, and globally 37%. And this land provides private goods, which is you grow to make a profit, and also public goods. And it's that I'm going to concentrate on today. It's the public goods that have a value to the both locally and nationally and globally. For example, water resources or carbon, and these are called ecosystem services. And we know that the impact of some farming methods on these public goods, these ecosystem services, such as water quality and quantity and regulation, is of increasing concern to all. We all know that we're impacting them, but we don't know how much and where. So regulators and legislators are looking to incentivize management for the improved provision of public goods. This is perhaps the way of the future of legislation. But there are still challenges. We still don't know which public goods provides goods for who, how this varies spatially, which farm provides how much, and what the value of this over time, over space, and how management practices impact upon them. How important is land management, which we're all talking about today, impact on those public goods and the value of those. So data is needed for this, for the understanding of these public and private goods. It needs to be accurate, relevant, comprehensive, low cost, which is what we are talking about today. And it also has to take into account the privacy and also the legitimacy of a collection system. So if we are all going towards incentive payments, then we need to have a very legitimate collection system. In collaboration with King's College London, we've produced 3 tools that are available online. Some might be of interest. On the left, we have this EcoActuary, which is a spatial model. It's built on satellite data, and it allows you to, and it's connected to a catastrophe model that insurers use for looking at natural hazards, such as flooding and drought. And one of the uses that we're looking at is for understanding natural flood management and understanding their collective impact in terms of hydrology, but also in terms of how the monetary cost and the saving due to the mitigation of natural flood management downstream. So in the middle, we have these FreeStations, which you're welcome to. I've got some examples that have come along today, which are these low-cost DIY. They look a bit homemade. As I said before, they look a bit homemade because that's exactly what they are. The build designs are all open source, meaning free. They're all online. So if you're interested in building a weather station that's connected to the internet, or soil moisture sensors, an array of soil moisture sensors to look at how your soil is doing that's connected to the internet, all the instructions are there online for you to build, and they're low cost. And finally, the one on the end is a water quality sensor, looking at broad values of water quality. So, they're all the instructions are there free online, and I can show you the one on the right is the smart system, which is the internet platform, which is also freely available, which allows this to talk to the internet and provide you with not only the raw data, but some clever metrics as well of showing you how this data can allow you to value and assess how much public goods that your land provides, which is the way that we're moving to in the future. So it's an Internet of Things powered platform. It combines the forecast agency, Environment Agency data, what's coming in the next 5 days, the rainfall, and the FreeStation data all on one page, and it allows you to understand the contribution of nature and land to public goods. So we're actually allowing you to, you can download your raw data yourself if you want to know how much rain you've had, but also this sort of clever extra metrics as well. So I haven't got an internet connection. I was going to have a live feed here of a temperature and humidity sensor to show you how it reacts in real time. But these are real-time sensors that they are sent either every minute or every hour or every day according to how you set up. So they are you can see the data in almost real time or near real time. So what is FreeStation? Okay, so in the last decades, we've found that ground-based monitoring globally, the infrastructure for measuring water level, water flow, rainfall, fundamental things are declining globally in all over the world. And we can use remote sensing, it's very valuable, but we can't use satellite data to sense all the variables that we need to measure. And there's also still some areas, problems with satellite data. It's very useful, but we need them both. We need both ground truth data and satellite data. And also technological barriers to designing and building your own hardware, they're falling. It's becoming easier and easier. I know I've met a lot of people that are since interested in electronics that are tinkering around, making their own sensors using Arduinos and so on. So it's not that difficult anymore. And the way we've set up FreeStation is that you need no coding experience, no electronics experience. The only skill that you actually need to learn or use is soldering, and because you'll need to solder the appliance. That's the only thing that's perhaps a little tricky. Everything else is designed to be plug and play, easy for anyone to use. So the idea is that they're very cheap. Our target is that they're meant to be 3% of the parts cost, not the labor cost, because it takes time to build. But the parts costs are only 3%, more or less, of the equivalent proprietary loggers. And so for the same amount of money, instead of buying one very precise, very accurate weather station or monitoring station that is just monitoring one small part of your land area, which isn't really much use given how spatially variable it is, you can use the same budget to instrument a whole catchment, a whole farm with the same or less money. That's the idea of it's not as precise or accurate to the nth degree, but it's good enough for what you want to measure, and you can build more than one, and therefore get a more understanding of what all the individual components of your land area can provide. So, as I say, the world is variable. More samples is better than a greater per sample accuracy. It's better to have more spatially than one very precise. So it also incorporates it's web connected, therefore it's got an early warning system capability in there, particularly interesting for flooding and for drought. And they're they're for nowcasting and for integrating. And it's also, at the moment, a key focus of lab teaching and research at King's College London. They have a very popular component that's a lot of people enjoy, making their own weather stations. I've just realised that I've been talking about this slide and I hadn't moved on, so I do apologise. I got mixed up because they have both slides here. So, no, I haven't. I've mixed myself up. Here we are. We're now on the right slide. So what can I build? What's out there? What have we got here? We've got weather stations, which does rain, fog. We have a fog gauge if you're interested in the contribution of fog. Wind-driven rain, there's different ways of looking at rainfall, air temperature, humidity, solar radiation, and also you have these soil moisture sensors that are very cheap. They're only sort of 10 or 15 pounds for the sensor itself. We can measure river stage, meaning the river level. The flow, we're developing new ways of looking at flow and discharge if you're interested in how much water is going off a land, particularly if it's in a flood risk area. And there's other wildlife cameras, sap flow, there's other sensors out there. So these are the sorts of things you can build. This is a weather station here on the right. And we have these deployed around the world. So they were developed as part of the Sustainable Development Project. So we have them in Burkina Faso and Ghana and South Africa and Africa. We have them in India. We have them in the Philippines. And in South America, we have them in Colombia, in Ecuador, and Brazil. So they are worldwide and very robust, even in the most harsh environments. They perform very well, even very hot or very humid. Additional sensors out there. There's a whole list of things. If you want to get into building your own sensors, there's information on our website of how to get hold of these. Perhaps you want to develop your own. There's an unbelievable amount of sensors that are available that you can repurpose for your own environmental monitoring. That's really what FreeStation does. So we don't build the sensors, but we find the sensors that are used for other bits of kit, and we're saying that's very useful. Let's see how we can use it for our purpose, which is environmental monitoring. So how much does it cost? How long does it take? For example, we've got a range of prices. The lower price usually indicates one that's not internet connected, because that's often the most expensive bit. The bit that talks to the internet is called the particle. And without that, it keeps the cost right down to very cheap. So, for example, this is logs with an SD card if you don't use the internet. So something like £100 or £200, and it takes sometimes 2 to 4 hours. The first one you make, it takes a lot longer, and then once you've had that experience, you do speed up, and you can make them a couple of these a day. If not more, especially if you have a team of builders or volunteers, perhaps, in your community. So that's the sort of idea. The prices for parts, as I say, and the best thing about these is that they're internet connected. So globally, this is the global the global cellular coverage. So you can see most of the world, there are areas of important farmland where we can deploy these that will be internet connected. And also you can connect up with other sorts of data too. So low cost doesn't necessarily mean low accuracy or precision or quality. They're very good. They are good enough. Low cost is more non-specialist, consumer, mass-produced components that are often used for other things. For example, parking sensors in cars. We're looking at parts of washing machines, turbidity sensors, and they are repurposed here. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the website that, as I was saying, you can look at the raw data, which is very useful for every day, but also there's some metrics that we're developing with King's College London, and bringing together these multiple connected sensors, this network of sensors, and the satellite data too. That's very useful to understand what the value of these public goods are. And for example here, looking at the value of soil water storage and the value of conservation agriculture to the provision of these public goods. So for example, this top line, if you're looking at mitigation of flood risk by soil storage, this is an online sort of like a spreadsheet. You just enter the data that you have. You just put in the salt bulk density, if you have that information, the area of your land, and then the number of your FreeStation that's measuring the flow at the bottom, where your assets are at risk, as they say, where the flood risk is. And you can work out how much soil storage in your land all the way upstream is actually mitigating flood risk all the way downstream. And that's quite powerful data, because you might be able to show that this is a valuable thing that you're providing, a public good that you're providing. And The second one is sort of how much does conservation agriculture actually mitigate flood risk? This is something that's particularly interested here on John Cherry's farm. So you can just put in the, we have a paired site where you have two of these soil moisture sensors and in a paired experiment where you have conservation agriculture on one site, and then next door, just 100 meters away, under the same soil, the same land use, the same geology, same slope, same position on the slopes, are hydrologically the same, but just using standard traditional land management. So you're comparing the two. So if you had those two sets of information and were able to just to enter the ID of those two loggers, you could work out how much flood risk you're mitigating and the value of that eventually. So, so connected sensors can examine the difference in water storage under conservation agriculture versus the non-conservation agriculture counterfactual, and map these contributions, actually show on a map so you can understand what's going on, these contributions downstream, and look at how these flood peaks are, the river, how they contribute to reducing the flood peaks downstream. So, so this is some results of the farm right here. So we're looking at conservation agriculture here. This is just a kilometre or so. There's differences in bulk density and organic matter. I'm sure that there's no surprise between this farm and a neighbouring non-CA farm. And this differences usually means that there's higher porosity and better water infiltration and retention and less surface runoff. That's our hypothesis. And so we've been measuring soil moisture content at these two different sites. This is the photo of the two different sites. As I said, they're only 100 or so meters apart. And we're looking to see how conservation agriculture contributes to natural flood management. It's a large-scale spatial method to reduce flood for natural flood management. Because and also it can, as well as mitigating floods, it can increase dry season flows, which is important for the water companies, because it could increase infiltration through more subsurface flow, as opposed to losing it through runoff, and therefore perhaps increasing erosion. So the difference is about 9 years. One has been under conservation agriculture for about 9 years, the other one not at all. And the CA field clearly has much greater soil moisture and thus water infiltration during the rainfall. This is very much a pilot study. We just had a few events. This has just been going for a few months, so this is not much data. It's very hard to draw some solid conclusions with this. But this is just sort of the initial data that's coming out, that there is a difference. Whereas the non-CA at the bottom, you can see that it infiltrates very little. It's ponding at the surface, and it's generating runoff. And that water is lost for plants and also for aquifer recharge. Okay, so moving on. It's not always the same. This is another site that we have in Bedfordshire where it's only 3 years. The question is, how long does CA need to be in practice before it makes a hydrological difference? Although there is a difference in bulk density and organic matter between these two farms, even over only just 3 years, there isn't enough difference to say that they are hydrologically different. So you do need to have, according to these, just a sample of two, a bit of time in order to make a difference. It's likely there's not enough change in that time. But soil type obviously affects it. Rain type can affect it. The age, since the change of management, they're all important factors on how conservation agriculture affects soil hydrology. But we really need more studies and longer-term studies before we can draw any strong conclusions from this. So I just want a few words. I think I've just got 2 slides left. Another natural flood management. that's very popular for farmers is farm retention ponds. And if we were to compare what's best, a retention pond or conservation agriculture, there's pros and cons with both. Farm retention ponds, they're quite expensive, but as soon as you built them, they're low maintenance. They're point scale, meaning they only apply at a point, as opposed to conservation agriculture, which uses large areas of data of your land. The downside is they take up valuable land and they can encourage waterlogging in nearby fields if they're holding it. Designs like this, it's got a drain at the downstream end, and so therefore it actually stores very little water during normal events. And they may store more during very heavy events where the intense rainfall actually allows the water to build up in there. But also they could be subject to overflow and wall damage. So there are problems with this. But it is true that they do encourage a storage of water, of flood water. They're a very important way of storing water, but they're not too effective. I think the conclusion that we've had is that you're better off with improved farming methods over large areas than something like this, than retention ponds, and unless you're specifically aiming for aquatic biodiversity or co-benefits as well. If you're interested in improving the aquatic biodiversity, of course, this is excellent for that. So you can see this photo at the bottom shows the water level. The big tall stick on the left has got a water level. It's actually measuring changes every hour, and this is available online. And then the shorter stick is actually holding up the instrumentation for a soil moisture probe. So here we're looking at water level and soil moisture on the bank. And you can see that on the top, this is the water level. The recent rains that we've had, the very short-lived surface storage change in the pond, where it's much more important. The soil moisture is much longer-lived storage change in the soil. It's far more responsive, and it also holds the water for longer. The soil is more important than the actual retention ponds, and that's just the area on the side. So I think I'm going to. Am I running a bit short of time? Or this is talking about costing nature, which is a natural capital model for looking at estimating maps of public goods. It's a global model, and you can look at what are the benefits that we get from nature. This is a free-to-use model that's that's available online, and allows you to look at where the ecosystem services are, look at the different blends of services. For example, in the southeast there, the most important service is water. What's the most important service where you live? And also, what is the relative value, the spatial value? And what's the impact of land management on that? So this is costing nature, which is a natural capital model that's been going for about 15 years. It's very useful, but it's on a core scale, not on the farm scale. It's more on a policy scale, so perhaps less interest. And also the impact. One of the outputs of that is talking about SDGs, which we've been talking about in the talks, of Sustainable Development Goals, how important they are, and how public goods actually are contributing to global Sustainable Development Goals. So the role that farmers have. So that's really the only point I want to make with that. So this is my last slide. It's really a question that I want to hand over to you. Really, as a community, are you interested in the low-cost sensing side, the smart sensing with these new metrics? What would you be interested in doing? What sort of things would you want to monitor and measure? And at present, you can see what we have here. You can build your own weather station, and you can measure soil moisture. Are there any variables that you consider critical that we need to be monitoring, that we've missed? I'm a hydrologist, so I'm interested in water, and so that is my focus. So what are the variables that are critical to you? And also, would you actually be interested in building these yourselves? Is this something that you're inspired to go and look at the website and get the parts and put it together and have a go, even though I've told you it is quite simple to use, straightforward. And also, I have a list. You can add your name to a list if you're interested in becoming involved in any future studies, if they were to come about, of comparing conservation agriculture with non-conservation agriculture, which is something that we're interested in. So that's my questions to you, really. But thanks, that's me.
Thank you, Sophia. Yeah, still time for a few questions. They can relate directly to the questions that Sophia's fired out, or any other specific questions that you've got for Sophia. Okay, couple of hands.
Hi. Have you ever thought of being able to do this with schools or maybe a summer holiday club? Because farmers working in the community with, youngsters, it's much better to work with them instead of having bored teenagers.
Yeah, that is something we thought about. We have it set up. We haven't got any funding for that. We have a program called EduStation, and we'd like to promote it in schools. We have all the teaching aids ready, and also how schools can twin with schools in developing countries, and then we can build them together, and they can learn about their environments with us. So we have that all in place, but we have no funding for that at the moment. Yeah. It is. Well, also these are we've had people sort of doing wire-a-thons, community build sessions that they come together and actually learn about how to do this. We sort of help them with the soldering part, but we don't enable people to come together. But it's something that perhaps you can do within yourself. But yes, I think it's really important to bring schools in, but we don't run workshops or anything like that for schools. I like the idea.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Race. I really enjoyed your presentation. I run a small business called Crop Performance here in the UK that was founded in California 10 years ago. We do water quality monitoring. We do many of the things that you just described and are doing it in landscape scale change that includes fires and post-fire flood risk management. And I'm curious specifically about the instrumentation, these low-cost solutions that you're putting together for turbidity. Have you done anything with the washing machine parts? I'm very interested. I mean, we're a for-profit company. We got into the water quality business because we monitor potato production, which is the whole reason why we came to the UK. In the US, they grow potatoes in sandy soils, so they always have nitrate leaching problems. And unlike the UK, the US is a litigious society, so everyone's suing everyone else. So we can't figure out how to make money doing this, which is why it's a nonprofit in the UK. But in the US, they're always suing each other. So we have a load of work, okay, at scales like 300,000 acres. We just finished 2 years in Northern California doing a 35-year retrospective analysis on erosion and runoff. We have a team of hydrologists and geomorphologists working on this stuff, forecasting not just flow rates for flood protection, but also sediment transport across big pieces of land that with a lot of topography involved. Anyways, this is a long story, and what they want is they want erosion, runoff, nutrient and sediment loading, and then pesticides, and then all the biological characteristics for fish. So we've built a platform over the last 10 years that does all this stuff. We can talk about it offline. But one of the constraints, and you mentioned it in your presentation, is ground truthing and citizen science. You could use bored teenagers to do citizen science. Yes. We started doing that with members of the public, as you would call it in British English, as opposed to bored teenagers, but I think that's a brilliant idea that lady had, not just for an individual farm, but for catchments at risk. So my question is around instrumentation for turbidity. You mentioned this thing about the washing machine parts. This has come up and amongst our team because we do what you call this, you're hacking equipment together to create do-it-yourself options. Yes, and exactly. This needs to be done for turbidity measurements. I mean, have you done anything like that?
Yes, our turbidity sensor's there.
What does it measure? Does it measure total suspended solids, or is it measuring just the turbidity of the water? Or?
It's like it uses optical turbidity.
Oh,
but
okay.
we also have electrical conductivity sensor.
Okay, yeah.
And water temperature. So there are 3 water quality.
Are you doing pH as well?
No,
or temperature?
pH is, it's very difficult to do that low cost.
Yeah.
So we have looked into that and parking that at the moment.
Okay.
So pH is very difficult, but we have turbidity and electrical conductivity, or total dissolved solids,
Okay.
and temperature for water.
Fantastic. I look forward to talking with you more. I'm sorry, that was like a comment, a question. I'm excited that you're even here doing this. When I talk to people about in the UK about our work, they think I'm insane. Like, really? This going on? Yeah, it's going on. And the other last comment is, what about pathogens? Are you doing anything about pathogens in water?
Yeah, I've had a lot of requests for that sort of thing, but there's no cheap, low-cost
No,
way
we're
of
doing
it.
that cheap, low cost. We're
Yeah.
developing diagnostics for E. coli for the outbreaks in California with the irrigation water. We're actually working with a UK medical diagnostics company in Bedfordshire on an R&D project. We brought the funding to them, and they're helping us build it's a lateral flow device for E. coli. So maybe we can talk offline.
Any other questions? Okay.
Oh, what?
Oh, is there one? Sorry, yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I was just wondering if you might go back to the what can I build slide and just kind of go, like I sort of wrote scratchy notes about photosynthetic something, so about the different things you can measure. And was there a mention of soil carbon, and is there anything that indicates, I mean, obviously that's really difficult to measure, but is there anything that you think relates to that? You
Of
know?
soil carbon?
Yeah.
No.
No, okay, fine. So it wasn't that one, it was the one, yeah, all these things. So there's pH there, is that not? So you
Yeah,
said
there are pH sensors, but they also need other things measured at the same time, and they're very sensitive. We just haven't got them out the lab and into the field yet. I think they're still under development. It is something that we've looked into, but they are tricky to make reliably. Really.
So you're the...
But yeah, pH would
So the things that you were measuring are this soil, what's it called? What did you call it even? The bulk density. So
yes,
is
that was, we took samples at different depths and they were done in a lab.
Right, okay.
They weren't monitored. Yes, they were just one-off measurements.
Right, okay. So are there any of the things, what out of the things that you can measure do you think are most relevant for us to show ecosystem services for regenerative agriculture, basically?
Well, I think these are the ones that we have developed. I think just, having the weather station, water level, water flow, which is still under development, and soil moisture, I think and the water quality, I think they are the key ones that are useful for this.
Thanks for that clarification.
Okay, just one more question.
Hi, we have actually been in touch by email, Ian Davis. I offered one of the sites for it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. You may remember I've got a 23-year history of the EA flood risk, so quite an interest in this. The big issue for this particular area, as you rightly highlighted, is going to be water. In terms of the potential impact of conservation agriculture and regenerative agriculture on increasing infiltration rates to reduce flood risk and also to improve the water resource available to these guys at Affinity. Has your project got any links into the developing new agriculture regime to try and combine what you're doing with steering the proposals for payment for public goods to farmers? Because clearly there's a lot of potential for that to be built on this. The system, a subsidy system based on public goods can only work if it's allied to a consistent way of measuring it. And I just wondered whether you're actually part of that link at the moment.
No, we're not part of that, but I 100% agree with you. We need, if there was a national network or a regional network of this sort of monitoring, that's the sort of thing that would be needed in order to put the put this sort of legislation into place and actually allow people to say, look, this is exactly what my farm is contributing, and therefore that's how payment ecosystem services would use. At the moment, it's quite woolly how people can actually value what their land is providing, or you're looking at just one-off things rather than looking at all the ecosystem services. You're just looking at single ones. So we'd like to look at, you know, the contribution of the value of your land in its entirety. So yeah, I would love to get involved, and hopefully this is the way that we're moving forward.
Okay, thank you again, Sophia, and thank you everyone for your time.